What's up everyone, Ben from Living Survival, and I thought we'd do something a little bit different today. Typically, I review the items, I get a lot of footage, and then I give you my final thoughts in my review. Well, today, you're gonna come along with me. It's the first time I'm gonna be looking at these knives, and I'm gonna show you what it's like to do a review. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video to find out how you can enter to win one of these knives. Alright, so for those of you that have been around my channel for a while know that I really don't do first looks, meaning I don't do unboxings and first looks and then follow up with a video later on. I really try to get some use out of an item instead of just trying to be the first to get that video up on YouTube. So today what I thought we would do is sort of a behind the scenes look at what I look for when I first receive a product, as well as how I go about testing. Now today is going to be tailored towards knives, but if you like this type of video, we can do it with other items as well. So let's take a look at what we have. We have two knives from the new Spec Plus Alpha line from Ontario Knives. Now they have their Spec Plus line, which we looked at before, the SP8 Survival Machete. Then they have their Spec Plus Gen 2, which of course includes the SP50 and SP53, which I'm a big fan of. These are two new knives from their Spec Plus Alpha line. We have the Survival knife, and then we have their Alfa Machete. So that's what we're going to look at today. You can see very similar sheath on both. It does look like they both have the same handle, the same size handle. Of course, just a little bit shorter sheath here. Now the sheath isn't bad for a nylon sheath. Typically I'm not a huge fan of nylon sheaths, especially with tops, for example. Their sheaths are really loose and wiggly. These ones do have good retention, which is nice. There's 2 points of retention, but that can also get in the way. For example, if you unbutton the knife here, and you go to pull the knife out, over time this can run across your blade and you can end up just chopping that right off. So not a huge fan of this style nylon sheath. So that being said, I don't spend a whole lot of time on the sheath. I do look for several things, like what kind of attachment does it have? Does it have a tech lock? Does it have a belt loop like this? Does it have a dangler? Does it just have a little a slit in them to run your belt through? A lot of times they'll have too small of a slit that you can't get sort of the rigger style belts in, the 1.5 inch or the 2-inch belts. So, those are things I look for. This does have a nice large belt loop, so you'd have no problem getting that on your belt. It does have 2 points of retention, which is nice. If you only had the one here, it might wiggle around. You want to shake your sheath, make sure that it's not going to fall out on you. And this one with the 2 points of retention is not going to pull out, so that's great. And then I might just look at the stitching, just make sure that it's stitched all the way around. I've had sheaths that have had a huge hole in the stitching here. So, again, fairly decent sheath for being a nylon sheath, and especially at the price point that these come in at. Nothing else to say here on the Machete sheath. Same exact thing, just a little bit longer. So let's dig into the actual blade here. As far as this Spec Ops Alpha, the survival knife, that is what they're calling it. You got a clip point here. It's got a overall length of 10.19 inches with a 5-inch blade on it, which is nice. It's got a rubber handle here. So certain things I'm looking for when I open a fixed blade, I want to see the grind, and if the grind is equal and symmetrical, and you can see that the grind is symmetrical there, then I'm going to look at the tip of the knife, make sure the grind is nice and symmetrical there. We can look at it from several different angles just to make sure that the grind is fairly equal. Sometimes it can be off just a little bit. Looks like this one is pretty much dead on here. You're equal, your grind is equal all the way down. I'm looking for things like how thick the spine is. Does it have a sharpened spine, a non-sharpened spine? What type of coating is on it? You can see here you got some sort of a traction coating on here. Got the Alpha Spec Ops Alpha, or Spec Plus Alpha logo there. So you can see just from running it in and out of the sheath, there's a little bit of wear marks there. Those can usually just be rubbed off, but with any coating, it's going to come off over time. So again, looking at the grind, of course you want to test for initial sharpness. It does feel really sharp right out of the box, and it's symmetrically sharp too. So a lot of times if you run a ceramic rod down a knife, it's going to sharpen one edge and not the other. It's really hard to get those edges to line up on both sides. This one feels sharp on both sides, which is nice. Then on down into the handle, does it have a choil? Does it have a finger guard? Does it have jimping? Does it have any sort of texture on it? Now, of course, again, you know, these things that I look for are going to vary depending on the product. Is the handle comfortable? So, you know, I'm going to grab it, and of course, when we do some testing later on, the comfort of the handle is going to shine through. But initially, how does it feel in the hand? This one feels pretty good in the hand, not as good as some. Feels like it's made for a very large hand. It almost feels like you have two different points of grip here, further back and up front. And they've done that so that you can sort of dig your forefinger in there and lock your thumb up here to maybe do some finer work or to do some stabbing type cuts there, some slicing type cuts, but it actually feels better further back on the handle. So maybe that choil isn't really necessary there. Other things I'm looking for is, does the blade meet up with the top of the handle? That to me is a big comfort issue for me when I'm doing finer work. Sometimes the handles will stop back here and they end up giving me a hot spot or not being the most comfortable. So this is really nice that it lines up pretty perfectly with the end of the blade cutting surface to the top of the handle. So that's really nice. So what that means is I can choke right up and I can have my cut start right there at my hand, have my thumb directly over that. So when I'm doing finer work, it gives you just a lot of control. We can take a closer look at the handle here. You see there's a little bit of texturing on there. It is a nice, comfortable rubber handle. I do like rubber handles. They've got a lanyard hole here. It does have a skeletonized tang on the inside. So one thing to note is that there is no protruding pommel on the back. It would have been sort of nice to see that, especially in a survival knife. You know, sometimes you do got to bang with that butt end of the knife, crush something, or try to get through something with the butt end of that knife. So it would have been maybe nice to have a little bit of a exposed tang there. You do have sort of this texturing on the bottom and on the top. No real jimping. I guess that's as close to jimping as you can get with rubber, but it does feel really good. It's definitely non-slip, so that's nice. Not the best reverse grip here. Again, something is just off with that grip, at least for my hands. It's going to vary between you know, different people, of course, but something's definitely off with that grip. It just feels sort of large. Maybe, you know, with gloves it would feel a little bit better. It just feels a little bit overdone, in my opinion. Maybe it needs to be a little bit thicker, you know, right here in the center to make up for some of that. So not a huge fan of the handle. We'll have to see how it feels, if it feels any better when we're actually doing some cutting. One last thing I look for is balance. You know, where's the balance? Where's the center point on the knife? This one feels like it's sort of all the way out here on the edge, which isn't bad. I sort of like it to be right there at the top of the handle. Again, gives you less fatigue and you know, just gives you finer control when you're doing some of that finer work with a small knife like this. So let's set that one aside, and let's also take a look at the Spec Plus Alfa Machete. Same retention, 2 retention points on the sheath as we mentioned earlier. I believe, like I said, I believe it has the same handle length. Let's get these side by side here. Looks like they have the exact handle. In fact, they do. So that's interesting. Same rubber handle. Now, of course, you got a little bit longer blade length on the Machete. You've got a overall length of 12.19 inches and a blade length of 7 inches. So this sort of reminds me of a smaller version of the SP8 Survival Machete. That's a knife that I looked at very early on in my channel. It does have the grind that goes all the way around to the front, so that you could possibly do, you know, some chiseling type work with it. You know, something like this, possibly you could use it as a pry bar. They do call it a machete, although, you know, a machete to me is something that's a lot longer, something that's going to allow you to, you know, do a lot of chopping with. So we'll just have to see. But again, same comfortable handle as far as the rubber goes. Still, though, feels a little bit just awkward in my hand as far as the actual ergonomics of it. Feels well balanced. Again, you've got the blade surface coming all the way down to the top of the handle here, although it's not that big of a deal in a larger type blade like this. You do have the same textured coating on here, so pretty much the same specs as far as the handle and the blade go, other than the geometry of the blade, of course. Now these both are high carbon. Not sure what high carbon, they don't list it on their site, but you know, we'll see in a moment when we start testing out how well that edge is going to hold up. So the next step for me is to sort of summarize what the particular item or the particular knife in this case would be used for, or what was it designed for. In this case, it's a 5-inch survival knife. So if it were a bushcraft knife, I would think, you know, mostly woods tasks, camp tasks, food prep tasks. If it were a folding knife, I'd think everyday tasks. But in this case, you know, a 5-inch survival type knife to me represents a knife that you could use if you found yourself in a situation that you didn't plan on. So if you're in a survival type situation, what would I use that particular tool for? For me, I would want to know that it could cut, obviously. I would want to know that it could stab or you know, penetrate, maybe a steel door, or you know, a drywall wall, just in case I had to breach something or get into something. You know, you want to know that a survival knife can take a fair amount of abuse. So those are things that I would sort of think of to test with the knife. Is it a good fighting knife? Is it something that I can use for wilderness tasks as well? You never know. You know, you don't always end up in the woods in a survival situation. It can certainly be in an urban environment, but most of us have the fantasy that you're going to end up in the woods. So, you know, is it going to be good at those particular woods or camp type tasks? Now I have several tests that I do with knives, sort of to just get a good feel of the ergonomics. How does the handle feel? Get a good idea of how well the edge is going to hold, and get an overall feel for just how durable the knife is. One of those is batoning. Batoning gives me a very good idea of how well the edge is going to hold up. It gives me a good idea of the overall feel. Is there, you know, does the knife send any shock through the handle? I know with the SP8 survival machete that I looked at before, that thing had an incredible amount of shock through it. So that's one thing that I'll consider when we get to the new machete here. So those are the type of tests that I do, and those are the reasons behind why I do them. So the first thing I might test out with a survival knife is how well does it slice. You know, how well is it going to slice through things like rope, different cordage, different webbing. This nylon cordage is a pretty good slice test. So it slices through that stuff, no big deal. Should have no problem slicing through paracord, which it doesn't. Slices right through. The handle's actually quite comfortable for slicing. If you notice, you sort of get this squeeze right up top here. You can sort of use your fingers there, and it actually gives you a great handhold for slicing. So there you go. Didn't think I'd like the handle, but for slicing anyway, it works decent. Now, tip tests are not something that I do in every video. Again, it's going to depend on the knife, but I think a tip test for a survival type knife is a good test. Maybe you have to stab through the seat back in a car, for example. Maybe you have to you know, stab through some metal. Maybe you're stabbing an attacker, for example, or maybe you just have some like drywall and you want to stab through it. So being reasonably careful, you know, obviously I'm not going to stab into bone and then try to twist the tip and see how well it works, but you can see here just on some average pine wood here that we are able to stab it, twist the tip, and we're not having any problems with that tip breaking. You can see it's a pretty fragile tip on there. So again, you know, decent amount of tip penetration here, decent amount of prying without going overboard is something that I like to see the knife be able to handle. Then of course we want to check our tip. You can see just how fine of a point that tip comes down to. No issues there. So again, passes my penetration test. Next up would be, you know, slicing. How well does the knife slice? How does it feel in the hand when slicing? And I can tell right off the bat that, you know, here's where that handle is going to come into play for me and not be the most comfortable. It's just that awkward grip again for me with the handle. We'll try it with some gloves on in a moment, but you can see not the sliciest knife out there, but it'll certainly get the job done for you. We can do some little chops just to kind of see again how balanced is the knife. How does it feel when we're sort of swinging it around like this? That feels comfortable. Again, this reverse grip when I'm holding it like that is much more comfortable than just your full-on baseball bat type grip. So that works good at some minor chopping there. Again, the handle is not the most comfortable though in that standard grip. Now instead of just testing on pine, we can test it on something harder like this oak. Again, already getting a hot spot there, but you can see it's slicing through this oak. No big deal. It's not the sliciest, that's for sure. It sort of takes some work to get that edge in there, but definitely will get the job done. Next up for me would be batoning. How well is that edge gonna hold up? So we can baton through some oak here. Typically what I like to use, a lot of guys will just use pine, and of course it's gonna go right through pine. You could probably baton a butter knife through pine. But we can get some of this hardwood, split down. Again, I'm using that comfortable handhold. I'm not using the uncomfortable handhold. So, all right, so let's throw some gloves on, see if that makes any difference in the handle. Let's attack a bigger piece here. Really try to put this knife to work. Definitely a hard piece of oak there, but gets through it with no problem. Let's go one more time here. Definitely a harder piece there. Let's check our edge. It's holding up perfectly fine. You can see that traction coating starting to get some wear on it. Probably could be scrubbed off, but eventually it'll wear off. Well, that's good to see. It's got a good heat treat and the edge is holding up just fine. So let's switch over to what they call a machete now. Not really a machete in my book, but since we're batoning here, let's go ahead and do it with this knife as well. Now, again, I do like that the blade surface comes all the way back to the handle, so you can really get a lot of that knife in your wood surface. Now this is something that I certainly would use to baton down wood around camp, around the home. That sort of reminds me of a fro a little bit, but let's see how well it works at chopping through some of this hardwood. Now again, with the SP8 really sent a ton of shock through the handle. I'm not really getting that with this knife at all. No shock at all, which is nice. Pretty much the same comfort as far as the handle goes. Obviously it's the same handle. This one feels a little bit more balanced though. Feels like it could do some light chopping, so although I didn't really do any chopping with the other knife, there was no need. Let's do a little bit of chopping with this one. All right, before we do some chopping, let's just do some basic stuff here. Let's see how well it slices through this rope here. Looks like it has no issues doing that. We can take a piece of this oak here and just do some simple slicing here. And I wanted to do it with gloves on. I wanted to see if it made a difference, and it doesn't. It's that same hot spot still there in the handle, in the grip, and of course with this hollow grind, it's not going to be the sliciest, that's for sure, but it will get it done. Let's do some light sort of craft chops here. That sort of feels like what this knife is going to excel at. Just some sort of craft chops. I'm not expecting it to chop down a tree, that's for sure. Let's just try to chop through this piece of wood. This is about the thickest, I think, something of this size would chop through. And other than prying, you know, this is probably not my first choice for a tool that I would want to have with me. Let's go ahead and do some chops here. So you can see, chopped about halfway through that. But it's definitely no large chopper, that's for sure. I mean, it'll get the job done, but it's uncomfortable doing so. It just doesn't have the weight to get through anything substantial. So on this Alfa Machete here, really the tip isn't going to be made for stabbing, although I guess you could. It doesn't have much of a tip there. It's more of a chisel ground end there. Might work for sort of chiseling your way through something, but mainly that's going to be used for prying. You know, prying at a door, prying at some metal or something. So there you go, guys. That's a very brief look at what I do behind the scenes to test out my knives. Now, when I'm testing out a knife, I usually just carry it around with me wherever I go and sort of just chop things, cut things, just to get a good general idea of how I like using it. But there are some specific tests, like you saw today, that I pretty much put every knife through. Price-wise, they're pretty reasonable. I think they're right around about $30. So there you go, guys. This is the Spec Plus Alpha from Ontario Knives. Alright everyone, so there you have it, sort of a first-hand look of what happens when I get an item, I open an item, and I start to use it, what I look for, especially in knives. Same goes for flashlights or any other gear I review. Typically, take it out, use it a bunch. Typically I take it out, use it for a few weeks, gather up some pros and cons. Typically I take it out, use it for a few weeks, gather up some pros and cons. Now, remember, I research the products I review, not the other way around. So before I even receive an item, I've done a lot of research on it, so I pretty much know what to expect. Sometimes I see things that I didn't expect, and those might be cons, those might be pros, but for the most part, I research the products so I know what I'm getting into before it even shows up at my doorstep. So how do you enter to win one of these knives? Super simple. I'm going to be giving it away on my forums. It's just way easier than giving it away on YouTube, because on YouTube you rarely can find the contact person that goes behind the username on YouTube. I wish they'd simplify that. So I'm going to be giving these away on my forums. 2 knives, 2 winners. I'm going to make a post over there. I'll share it in the description below, and also the pinned comment in the comment section below. That'll be the link. Go on over there, sign up. It's super easy. You can do it with your Facebook or an email address, and that way I have your email address. If you're the randomly selected winner, it's super easy to get a hold of you and ship you your item. So head on over there to worldwidesurvival.com. You can check out the full rules on this giveaway. All you have to do is comment on that post over there. You can comment on the YouTube video as well, but that doesn't count as an entry. The entries will be counted only over at the forums, again, so that I can easily contact you. So also let me know in the comment section what you guys think of the new Spec Plus Alpha line from Ontario. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed the video today. Please give it a big thumbs up for me. Make sure you share this video to your friends and family on your social media. And if you haven't already done so, click subscribe and also click that notification bell to get notified of new videos.